What would you do if you were the hunter and suddenly became the prey? You've spent months stalking victims in the darkness, choosing when to strike, disappearing before retaliation. You're invisible, untouchable. You control whether you engage or vanish. Then one day, the darkness fills with light. The sky that was always empty now swarms with aircraft hunting you. The ocean that hid you now betrays your position. The victims you stalked now have protection you can't defeat. The rules changed overnight, and you didn't get the memo. You're still thinking like a hunter when you're already prey. This is the story of how German U-boats dominated the Atlantic for 3 years, sinking ships faster than Allies could build them, winning a war of attrition that would starve Britain into surrender. Then America did something so simple it seems obvious in retrospect, but was revolutionary at the time. They put aircraft carriers with convoys, not fleet carriers. Tiny escort carriers built on merchant ship hulls, slow and vulnerable, carrying a few dozen aircraft. These small carriers turned the Atlantic from a U-boat hunting ground into a U-boat graveyard in 18 months. This is about how innovation defeats dominance, how hunters become prey when the environment changes, and why the side that adapts fastest wins regardless of who starts stronger. The choice between protecting what you know and embracing what works determined who controlled the Atlantic and ultimately who won World War II. March 1942, the North Atlantic. A German U-boat, designation U-123, sits on the surface in darkness 300 miles east of New York. The commander, Captain Lieutenant Hartigan, is scanning the horizon through binoculars. He's hunting. For 3 hours, he's seen nothing. Then, on the horizon, smoke. A merchant ship, alone, silhouetted against the dawn sky. Hartigan orders the U-boat to submerge to periscope depth and approach. The merchant ship is a British freighter carrying supplies from America to England. Food, ammunition, fuel, everything Britain needs to continue fighting. The freighter has no escort, no destroyer, no protection. It's alone in the vast Atlantic because there aren't enough escort ships to protect every convoy. Some ships travel alone, gambling they won't encounter U-boats. This ship lost the gamble. Hartigan centers the crosshairs on the freighter's hull, calculates distance, speed, angle, orders torpedoes fired. 2 torpedoes leave the U-boat, running straight and true. 40 seconds later, both slam into the freighter's side. Explosions. The ship lurches, starts listing. Hartigan surfaces to watch. The crew is abandoning ship, launching lifeboats. Within 10 minutes, the freighter slides beneath the waves. Hartigan notes the sinking in his log. Ship number 17 this patrol. He sunk 17 Allied ships in 3 weeks without taking damage. This is the U-boat's golden age. They call it the happy time. German submarines operating off the American coast with near impunity, sinking ships faster than Allies can build them. Hartigan will return to Germany a hero. He'll receive medals and praise. His patrol is one of the most successful in U-boat history, but Hartigan is operating on borrowed time. He doesn't know it yet. The thing that will destroy U-boat dominance is already being designed in American shipyards. It's not a superweapon. It's not revolutionary technology. It's an escort carrier, an aircraft carrier so small and cheap that America can build dozens of them, sending planes to protect convoys everywhere in the Atlantic simultaneously. Escort carriers will turn the Battle of the Atlantic from a German victory into a German catastrophe. They'll kill the U-boat fleet so thoroughly that by 1944, sailing in a U-boat becomes a near-suicide mission. But in March 1942, Hartigan doesn't know any of this. He's the hunter. The Atlantic is his hunting ground, and hunting has never been better. Let's understand what U-boats were doing to the Allied war effort. Every ton of supplies Britain needed had to cross the Atlantic by ship: food, oil, steel, ammunition, aircraft parts, rubber, tanks, everything. Britain produced some things domestically, but not enough. Without Atlantic convoys, Britain would starve and run out of ammunition within months. Germany knew this. The U-boat strategy was simple. Sink ships faster than Allies can replace them. Force Britain to surrender through blockade, not invasion. By early 1942, it was working. U-boats were sinking Allied ships at a rate of 700,000 tons per month. Allied shipyards were building new ships at 500,000 tons per month. The math was unsustainable. Britain was losing. Slowly but inevitably, the Atlantic was becoming a German lake. The problem was geography and physics. The Atlantic is vast. Even with destroyers escorting convoys, there were gaps. The Mid-Atlantic Gap was the worst, a zone in the middle of the ocean beyond the range of land-based aircraft. Destroyers could protect convoys, but destroyers couldn't see far. A U-boat on the surface at night could spot a convoy from miles away using binoculars. The convoy couldn't see the U-boat until it was too late. The U-boat would radio other U-boats, wolf pack tactics, and multiple submarines would attack simultaneously from different angles. Destroyers would chase them, but U-boats could submerge and vanish, then surface miles away and attack again. What convoys needed was air cover. Aircraft could spot submarines on the surface from miles away. Aircraft could force submarines to stay submerged where they were slow and blind. Aircraft could drop depth charges and sink submarines. But land-based aircraft couldn't reach the mid-Atlantic. They didn't have the range. Aircraft carriers could reach the mid-Atlantic, but fleet carriers were too valuable and too few. The British and Americans had maybe 20 fleet carriers total, and they needed those for Pacific operations and fleet actions. You can't risk a fleet carrier escorting merchant convoys. If you lose it to a submarine, you've traded your most valuable asset for tactical convoy protection. The math doesn't work. Then somebody, probably multiple people simultaneously because good ideas often emerge independently, had a thought. What if you built aircraft carriers specifically for convoy escort? Not fleet carriers built for speed and strike capability. Cheap carriers, slow carriers, built on merchant ship hulls. They'd carry 20-30 aircraft instead of 80. They'd be vulnerable to surface attack, but they'd be numerous and expendable. You could build escort carriers in civilian shipyards using existing merchant ship hulls. Fast construction, low cost. You could produce them in numbers that made it acceptable to risk them with convoys. The British built the first escort carriers in 1941, converting merchant ships. They worked, but production was slow. America looked at the concept and did what America does best: mass production. American shipyards started churning out escort carriers using standardized Liberty ship hulls. The process was streamlined. A hull gets a flight deck welded on top, a hangar below, catapults for launching aircraft, arresting gear for landing. Nothing fancy, nothing elegant, just functional. Each escort carrier cost about $10 million. Expensive for a ship, but cheap for an aircraft carrier. And America was building them at a rate of one every few weeks by 1943. The first escort carriers joined Atlantic convoys in late 1942. U-boat commanders noticed aircraft appearing in the Mid-Atlantic Gap. At first, they adapted. They started staying submerged during daylight when aircraft were active, surfacing only at night. But escort carrier aircraft operated at night too, using searchlights to spot submarines on the surface. The submarines adapted again. They stayed submerged longer, attacked less frequently, became more cautious. But staying submerged meant traveling slowly and finding fewer targets. U-boat effectiveness dropped. By mid-1943, the tide was turning. U-boats that had once sunk 17 ships in a patrol were now lucky to sink 2 or 3 before being forced to flee or being sunk themselves. Here's a specific example. May 1943. The escort carrier USS Bogue is sailing with convoy HX-239. 40 merchant ships crossing from New York to Liverpool. A U-boat Wolfpack, 7 submarines, is stalking the convoy. In the old days, 6 months ago, these 7 U-boats would savage the convoy. They'd sink maybe a dozen ships, cripple several more, escape mostly intact. But now there's an escort carrier. The Bogue launches aircraft at dawn. Within 2 hours, aircraft spot 3 of the 7 U-boats on the surface. The U-boats crash dive. Emergency descent to avoid aircraft. But diving takes time. Aircraft drop depth charges before the submarines can get deep. 2 U-boats are severely damaged. One sinks immediately. The second limps away, too damaged to continue the attack. The remaining 5 U-boats are now cautious. They stay deep during the day. But staying deep means they can't see the convoy. They can't position for attack. That night, they surface to intercept. The Bogue launches night aircraft, specially equipped with searchlights and radar. 1 U-boat is caught on the surface. Searchlight illuminates it. Depth charges sink it before it can dive. The other 4 U-boats abort the attack and flee. Final score, convoy HX-239 loses 0 ships. The U-boat Wolfpack loses 3 submarines, fails to achieve any sinks. This outcome, total escort victory, would have been impossible 6 months earlier. The escort carrier changed everything. Let me give you the numbers because they're stark. In 1942, U-boats sank 1,662 Allied ships, totaling 7.8 million tons. In that same year, U-boat losses were 87 submarines. The exchange rate favored Germany heavily, sink 19 ships for every U-boat lost. But in 1943, after escort carriers entered service in numbers, U-boats sank 463 Allied ships totaling 2.4 million tons, while losing 237 U-boats themselves. The exchange rate flipped. Now Germany was losing submarines faster than they could build them, while Allied ship production exceeded losses. By 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic was effectively over. U-boats still operated, still sank occasional ships, but they were no longer a strategic threat. They were prey being hunted to extinction. From the U-boat perspective, this transformation was terrifying and incomprehensible. Kapitän Leutnant Werner Henke, commander of U-515, described the change in an interrogation after his capture in 1944. He said, "In 1942, we were the hunters. We chose when to attack. We could surface at night, run fast, intercept convoys anywhere. The ocean was ours. By 1943, we were hunted, aircraft everywhere. You couldn't surface without risk. Staying submerged meant going slow, seeing nothing, finding nothing. We went from hunting to hiding, from predators to prey. In 1 year, everything reversed." Think about what that reversal means psychologically. You've been trained as an elite hunter. You're the tip of the spear. You have the advantage. Then the advantage disappears, not because you got worse, but because the enemy adapted. The rules changed while you were playing. Now you're doing the same things that used to work, but they don't work anymore. And there's no going back to the old way because the old way is obsolete. Your choice is adapt to the new reality or die still believing you're the hunter. Many U-boat crews couldn't adapt. They kept using tactics that had worked in 1942. Those crews died. The crews that survived were the ones who recognized they were now prey and changed their behavior accordingly. Here's a detail that illustrates how thoroughly the dynamic shifted. In 1942, U-boat commanders surfaced to attack because being on the surface gave them speed and visibility. By 1944, U-boats were using snorkels, devices that let them run diesel engines while staying submerged just below the surface. This meant they never had to surface. It also meant they were blind, slow, and vulnerable. The snorkel was defensive technology born from desperation. Submarines forced to act like submarines all the time, never surfacing, never using their full capabilities, just hiding and hoping to survive. The wolf became the rabbit. I want to pause and ask you something genuinely. No wrong answer here. If you were a U-boat commander in 1943 and realized the ocean that used to be your hunting ground was now a death trap, would you keep fighting? Or would you try to survive until the war ended? Because this is a real choice these men faced. Keep pressing attacks and probably die accomplishing little, or go through the motions while minimizing risk and maybe survive. What's the honorable choice? What's the practical choice? Drop your answer in the comments because I'm curious whether people value duty over survival or vice versa when duty becomes suicidal. The escort carriers themselves were fascinating machines. They weren't glamorous. Sailors called them jeep carriers, or less politely, Kaiser coffins, because they were built cheaply and quickly by Kaiser shipyards. They were slow, top speed around 16 knots, barely faster than the merchant ships they protected. Their armor was minimal. A torpedo hit would probably sink one. Their aircraft complement was tiny, usually around 24 planes, mostly Grumman Wildcats and Avengers. But none of that mattered for their mission. They didn't need to be fast because convoys were slow. They didn't need heavy armor because U-boats rarely got close enough to torpedo them. The whole point was aircraft kept U-boats at distance. They didn't need many aircraft because the Atlantic isn't the Pacific. You're not striking enemy islands or fleet actions. You just need enough planes to maintain patrol coverage around the convoy. The key was numbers and presence. By having escort carriers with convoys, you eliminated the mid-Atlantic gap. Nowhere in the Atlantic was beyond air cover. A U-boat couldn't surface anywhere without risk of being spotted. This constant pressure forced U-boats to stay submerged most of the time, and submarines that stay submerged can't hunt effectively. They're too slow. They can't see far enough. They run on batteries that need recharging. The escort carrier's real weapon wasn't the depth charges its aircraft dropped. The real weapon was presence, the knowledge that aircraft might appear at any moment. This forced U-boats into defensive posture, which meant they failed at their offensive mission. Let's talk about the technology evolution on both sides. U-boats started adding anti-aircraft guns. If aircraft attacked, they'd surface and fight rather than diving. This sometimes worked. Aircraft were vulnerable to gunfire, but it also meant U-boats stayed on the surface longer, becoming easier targets for other aircraft or destroyers. Germany developed acoustic torpedoes that homed in on the sound of ship propellers. These could hit escorts that were maneuvering to avoid torpedoes. Allies developed countermeasures, noisemakers that detonated acoustic torpedoes prematurely. Germany developed faster U-boats, type von Wayne boats that could go 16 knots submerged. These arrived too late. Only a handful entered service before the war ended. The Allies developed better sonar, better depth charges, better radar, better coordination between ships and aircraft. But the fundamental advantage was the escort carrier itself, the ability to put aircraft over convoys anywhere in the Atlantic. That strategic advantage trumped tactical innovations. Germany could build better U-boats. They did build better U-boats. It didn't matter. Better technology launched from the wrong strategic position loses to adequate technology launched from the right strategic position. Here's what this teaches about innovation and adaptation. Germany had technological superiority in submarines at the war's start. Their U-boats were excellent machines crewed by well-trained sailors. They dominated the Atlantic through superior technology and tactics. Then America responded with inferior technology. Escort carriers were slow, vulnerable, barely qualified as real carriers. But escort carriers were deployed correctly, numerous everywhere, providing the coverage Germany couldn't counter. Superior technology in the wrong concept loses to inferior technology in the right concept. Always. This pattern repeats constantly in military history and business. The best product doesn't always win. The product deployed correctly wins. Betamax was better than VHS. VHS won because it was deployed better, cheaper, more available, adequate quality. HD DVD was arguably better than Blu-ray. Blu-ray won because Sony deployed it better, included it in PlayStation, locked down more studios. The best technology is the one that gets used effectively, not the one with superior specs. U-boats were superior submarines. Escort carriers were inferior carriers. Escort carriers won because they were deployed in sufficient numbers in the right place at the right time. By 1944, U-boat service had the highest casualty rate of any military branch in any country. 75% of U-boat crews died, 3 out of 4. If you sailed in a U-boat, your most likely outcome was death at sea. Compare this to RAF Bomber Command, the highest casualty rate in British military, which lost about 44% of air crews. U-boat service was nearly twice as deadly. Yet men kept volunteering because German propaganda still portrayed U-boats as elite warriors. The reality and the propaganda had separated completely. The propaganda said U-boats were winning. The reality was U-boats were dying. But young men believed the propaganda and volunteered for service that would probably kill them. This raises uncomfortable questions about information and choice. If those young men had known their true survival odds, would they have volunteered? Probably not. They volunteered based on false information, propaganda that portrayed U-boat service as dangerous but effective and elite. In reality, by 1944, U-boat service was dangerous, ineffective, and desperate. They died for a lie. Not the lie that Germany would win the war. Many German soldiers by 1944 suspected Germany would lose. The lie that their deaths would matter, would accomplish something strategic. Most U-boat patrols in 1944-45 achieved nothing except getting their crews killed. The men died believing they were warriors. They were actually victims of a strategic situation that made their sacrifice meaningless. Let's return to the strategic level. The Battle of the Atlantic was ultimately about logistics. Britain needed supplies. Germany tried to cut the supply line. America overwhelmed German interdiction with mass production. Merchant ships built faster than U-boats could sink them. Escort carriers built faster than U-boats could counter them. This is unglamorous but decisive. The side with more industrial capacity wins wars of attrition. Germany tried to win through skill and technology. America won through quantity and logistics. The lesson is brutal but clear. Abundance beats excellence when you can't replace excellence, and your enemy can replace abundance. The escort carrier itself became obsolete quickly after the war. By the 1950s, jets were replacing propeller aircraft, and jets couldn't operate from tiny escort carrier decks. The ships were scrapped or converted to other uses. Their operational lifespan was maybe 5 years. But in those 5 years, they won the Battle of the Atlantic, broke the U-boat blockade, ensured Britain stayed in the war, and allowed the Allied buildup for D-Day. They were temporary solutions to a specific problem. They worked perfectly. Then they became unnecessary and disappeared. Not all innovations need to last forever. Some innovations just need to solve the problem in front of you right now. Escort carriers did that. Here's what connects to your world right now. How often do you face a problem where the obvious solution doesn't work? You're trying to compete against someone better, faster, stronger. You can't beat them at their game, so do you accept defeat or do you change the game? The escort carrier was changing the game. Germany was winning the submarine game. America changed it to the air cover game. Germany couldn't adapt fast enough. This strategy, change the game instead of playing better at the current game, is how underdogs win. It's how startups beat established companies. It's how new technology replaces old. Don't compete at what your opponent does best. Change the rules so their advantages become irrelevant and your advantages become decisive. 2 more stories are on your screen right now. One about another time that mass production defeated superior technology. The Sherman tank story you might have seen. One about a time when refusing to adapt led to total defeat. Cavalry against machine guns in World War I. Watch both. See the pattern. The side that adapts to new realities wins regardless of who starts stronger, because strength is contextual. What made you dominant yesterday might make you vulnerable tomorrow if circumstances change and you don't. Thanks for watching this far, and for thinking about adaptation versus tradition, quantity versus quality, and whether winning requires being best or just being right for the moment. If this story made you think differently about innovation, strategy, or how underdogs beat favorites, hit that like button. Your engagement helps other people find these stories about how change happens and why adaptation beats perfection. Subscribe if you want more history that shows how wars and markets and technologies get disrupted by people who change the rules instead of playing better at the current game. The algorithm promotes engagement, so your comment or like determines whether someone else discovers that maybe being good enough in the right way beats being excellent in the wrong way. See you in the next one, where we'll explore more moments when the hunters became the hunted and everything changed overnight.